There is a moment that changes the balance of every relationship. It isn't when someone falls in love. It isn't when an argument begins. And it certainly isn't when someone wins. It happens the moment one person realizes they no longer need to stay. Most people spend their lives believing that holding on is a sign of strength. Fight harder. Love harder. Explain yourself one more time. Give one more chance. Never give up. We've been taught that persistence is always admirable. But psychology reveals a very different truth. Sometimes, the most powerful decision a person can make is to quietly walk away. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because they finally understand their worth. Strangely, this is the moment people begin seeing them differently. Respect appears. Attention returns. The same people who once took them for granted suddenly begin wondering, what changed? Why? Why does absence often create more value than presence? Why do people chase what they once ignored? And why does walking away sometimes become the loudest statement a person can ever make without saying a single word? The answer has less to do with relationships than it does with the way the human brain assigns value. Imagine holding a glass of water. At first, it seems ordinary, common, easy to replace. But imagine you've been walking through a desert for 3 days. That same glass suddenly becomes priceless. The water didn't change. Its availability did. Human psychology works in surprisingly similar ways. We rarely appreciate what feels guaranteed, not because we're cruel, because familiarity quietly reduces perceived value. Psychologists call this habituation. The more frequently we're exposed to something, the less intensely we notice it. It's why the sound of a clock disappears after a few minutes. Why a beautiful view eventually becomes ordinary. And sometimes, why people stop appreciating those who are always there. Not because they stopped caring, but because the mind adapted. This doesn't mean you should disappear to manipulate people. Real detachment isn't a strategy. It's a transformation. It's the moment you stop asking, how do I make them value me? And start asking, why have I been seeking my value from them in the first place? That single question has the power to change your entire life. Because the strongest people don't walk away hoping to be chased. They walk away because they've finally stopped chasing. And once that happens, something remarkable begins to unfold, not only in the minds of others, but within their own. The psychology behind that transformation is far deeper than most people could ever imagine. But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. If walking away creates respect, why do so many people find it almost impossible to do? The answer is hidden inside one of the oldest survival systems the human brain has ever developed. For thousands of years, being accepted by the tribe wasn't just emotionally important. It was essential for survival. To be rejected often meant facing the wilderness alone. No protection, no food, no safety. Although our world has changed, our brains still carry traces of that ancient fear. This is why rejection can feel physically painful. It's why being ignored can hurt more than harsh words, and why so many people remain in unhealthy relationships long after they know they should leave. Not because they don't recognize the pain, but because the fear of being alone feels even greater. The brain often chooses a familiar pain over an unfamiliar freedom. Think about that for a moment. How many people stay in friendships where they aren't respected, jobs where they aren't appreciated, relationships where they constantly feel exhausted? Not because they're happy, because uncertainty terrifies them. Psychologists have long observed that people naturally prefer certainty, even when that certainty causes suffering. The unknown demands courage, and courage is rarely comfortable. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind you is a road you've walked your entire life. It may be broken, it may be leading nowhere, but at least you know where it goes. Ahead is a bridge disappearing into thick fog. You can't see the other side. You don't know what's waiting. Most people turn back, not because the old road is better, because the new one requires faith. Walking away feels exactly the same. You aren't just leaving a person. You're leaving certainty. You're stepping into a future your brain cannot predict, and the brain dislikes uncertainty. It constantly asks, what if I regret this? What if nobody else comes into my life? What if this is the best I'll ever have? Notice something curious. Almost every one of those questions begins with the words, what if? The mind creates imaginary futures and then reacts to them as though they've already happened. It predicts disaster without evidence. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how the human mind makes decisions. His research showed that people often fear losing something more than they value gaining something new, even when leaving would clearly improve their lives. This tendency, known as loss aversion, keeps millions of people trapped, not by reality, but by possibility. And perhaps that's the greatest prison of all. A prison built not from walls, but from imagination. Yet something remarkable happens. The moment a person finally chooses themselves, the fear doesn't disappear overnight. But with every step forward, their confidence quietly grows. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, because they discover they were stronger than fear had convinced them they were. And that's when detachment begins to change. It stops being an act of letting someone else go. It becomes an act of finally finding yourself. But this raises another question. If detachment is so powerful, why do the people who once ignored you often begin chasing you only after you've stopped chasing them? The answer reveals one of the most fascinating principles in all of human psychology. Now we arrive at one of the strangest paradoxes in human behavior. The moment you stop chasing someone, they often begin chasing you. Why? Did they suddenly realize your value? Did they magically become a different person? Not necessarily. What's changing isn't always their heart. It's their perception. Human beings have a remarkable tendency to overlook what feels permanent and desire what feels uncertain. As long as they believed you would always be there, Your presence became predictable, and the brain rarely pays attention to what it believes it can never lose. But the moment you walk away, certainty disappears, and uncertainty demands attention. Psychologists refer to this as the scarcity principle. The less available something becomes, the more valuable it often appears. Think about a product that suddenly sells out. People who never planned to buy it now desperately want it. Nothing about the product changed, only its availability. Human relationships can follow a surprisingly similar pattern. But here's where many people make a serious mistake. They hear this idea and decide to become distant, hoping someone will chase them. They ignore messages, pretend not to care, play emotional games. That's not detachment. That's manipulation. And manipulation is always driven by fear. Real detachment asks for nothing. It doesn't wait for someone to come back. It doesn't keep checking the phone. It doesn't secretly hope that silence will make another person suffer. Because true detachment isn't about controlling someone else's emotions. It's about no longer allowing their emotions to control yours. There's an enormous difference. Imagine holding a bird in your hands. You grip it tightly, afraid it might fly away. The tighter you squeeze, the more frightened it becomes. Eventually, it struggles to escape. Now imagine opening your hands. If the bird chooses to stay, it's because it wants to. If it flies away, it was never yours to keep. People are much the same. Love cannot be forced. Respect cannot be demanded. Loyalty cannot be negotiated. The more desperately we try to hold on, the more we often push others away. Ironically, the people who are hardest to leave are usually those who have already learned how to let go. Why? Because confidence changes everything. When someone knows their happiness doesn't depend on another person's approval, they become emotionally free. And emotional freedom is incredibly attractive, not because it's trying to attract anyone, but because it radiates peace. The psychologist Erich Fromm wrote that mature love is not built on possession, but on respect, care, responsibility, and freedom. Real love never says, "You complete me." It says, "I choose you, even though I know I can survive without you." That's the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment says, "I need you, or I'll fall apart." Connection says, "I appreciate you, but I haven't lost myself." One creates dependency, the other creates respect. And perhaps that is why people often begin valuing someone only after that person stops seeking validation. Not because they became colder, but because they finally became whole. Yet this raises another question. If learning to walk away creates so much inner peace, why do some people keep returning to the very situations that once broke them? The answer lies deep within the psychology of emotional attachment, and it may explain why letting go is one of the hardest things the human mind will ever have to learn. The answer has very little to do with love, and almost everything to do with familiarity. The human brain doesn't always choose what is healthiest. It often chooses what is familiar. even if that familiarity causes pain. Think about an old pair of shoes. They may be worn out, uncomfortable, barely holding together. Yet many people continue wearing them, simply because they're used to them. The unknown pair might fit better, last longer, take them farther, but the brain hesitates because uncertainty always feels risky. Relationships can become exactly the same. Sometimes, people don't stay because they're loved. They stay because they've become accustomed to being treated a certain way. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as intermittent reinforcement. Imagine someone who is kind one day and distant the next. They give affection, then suddenly withdraw it. They make promises, then disappear. They pull you close, only to push you away again. Logically, you know something is wrong. Yet emotionally, you find it difficult to leave. Why? Because the brain begins chasing the next moment of reward. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. Not every pull of the lever produces a reward, but every once in a while, it does. That tiny possibility keeps people playing. Some relationships follow the same pattern. A single loving moment can make someone overlook months of disappointment, not because they're weak, because their brain has become trapped in hope. Hope can be beautiful. It inspires us. It keeps us moving. But hope, without evidence, can quietly become a prison. Imagine waiting at a train station. You've been told the train will arrive soon. An hour passes, then 2, then 5. Still, you refuse to leave. Not because you've seen the train, but because you've invested so much time waiting for it. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to walk away. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. The more time, energy, or emotion we invest in something, the more difficult it becomes to let it go, even when staying causes more pain than leaving. This is why some people remain in relationships, friendships, or careers that stopped making them happy years ago. They're no longer fighting for the future. They're trying to justify the past. But here's the truth. That changes everything. Your past investment does not obligate your future suffering. Just because you spent years building something doesn't mean you must spend the rest of your life trying to save it. Sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's accepting reality. And acceptance is one of the greatest acts of emotional courage. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl once suggested that when we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Perhaps that's what detachment truly is. Not changing another person, not forcing a different ending, but becoming someone who no longer accepts what once felt normal. Because healing begins the moment your standards become stronger than your attachments. And once that happens, something extraordinary follows. You stop asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" and begin asking, "Why did I settle for so little?" That single question has the power to transform every relationship you will ever have. But there is one final lesson, the most liberating lesson of all. Because the people who truly master detachment don't lose their ability to love. They simply stop losing themselves while loving someone else. And perhaps this is the greatest misunderstanding about detachment. People think detachment means becoming cold, emotionless, distant. They imagine someone who no longer cares. But that's not detachment. That's emotional withdrawal. Real detachment is something entirely different. It isn't the absence of love. It's the absence of fear. The fear of being abandoned. The fear of disappointing others. The fear of saying goodbye when staying is destroying your peace. Imagine standing on the shore, holding a rope attached to a boat. The tide keeps pulling harder. The waves grow stronger. Your hands begin to bleed. Your body grows weaker. Someone watching from a distance asks a simple question. Why don't you let go? You answer, because I don't want to lose the boat. But look closer. You're not holding the boat anymore. The boat is dragging you. How many people live exactly this way? Holding on to relationships that have already ended emotionally. Holding on to friendships that exist only out of habit. Holding on to dreams that no longer belong to them. Not because they're happy, because letting go feels like admitting defeat. But here's something extraordinary. Nature never clings. Autumn doesn't beg the leaves to stay. The ocean doesn't chase every wave that reaches the shore. The sun doesn't refuse to set because darkness is coming. Everything in nature understands a truth that humans often resist. Every ending creates the space for a new beginning. The psychologist Carl Rogers believed that personal growth begins when we accept reality instead of fighting it. Acceptance is not surrender. It is clarity. It is looking at life exactly as it is, instead of how we desperately wish it would be. And clarity is one of the most powerful forms of freedom, because once you see reality clearly, your decisions become easier. You stop chasing people who have already walked away emotionally. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places you've already outgrown, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally started caring about yourself. Perhaps that's what self-respect has always been. Not demanding respect from others, but refusing to abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Think about a tree standing through every season. Spring brings blossoms. Summer brings shade. Autumn takes its leaves. Winter leaves it bare. Yet the tree never questions its worth. It doesn't compare itself to the flowers beside it. It doesn't panic when the leaves begin to fall, because it trusts that every season has a purpose. Your life is no different. Some people are meant for a season, others for a lifetime. The pain begins when we try to make seasonal people permanent. Maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do is not fighting harder, not loving harder, not proving your worth one more time. Maybe the bravest thing is quietly accepting that some chapters must end so a better story can finally begin. And when you understand that, walking away no longer feels like losing someone else. It feels like coming home to yourself. Before you leave, I want you to think about one question. What are you still holding on to that has already let go of you? Take a moment. Be honest with yourself. Your answer might change the direction of your life. If this journey helped you see detachment in a new light, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading your words might find the courage they've been searching for. And if you're fascinated by psychology, human behavior, philosophy, and the timeless wisdom hidden within everyday life, subscribe to Ancient Whisper. Every week, we explore the unseen patterns that shape our minds, our relationships, and our lives. Until our next journey, remember this: the strongest people are not those who never love deeply. They are the ones who know exactly when to let go without letting go of themselves. Because sometimes the most powerful step forward begins with walking away.